Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view on controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. I am your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Hello.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up?
We back.
Baby.
A lot to talk about, a lot to discuss. Appreciate y'all being patient with us. But how are y'all?
I'm good.
Good. Anything y'all want to get to specifically to start off?
We'll follow your lead, man.
You'll follow my lead?
Follow
Okay.
your lead.
I'll start with something that I kind of been doing a little bit more research on here lately. Because when I look at the comments on social media, one of the main comments that comes off, especially when it comes to certain situations, is does it have to be about race? Why make this about race? That's one of the main comments that you see. And it's usually one-sided. You know, Black people fully expect white people to be racist in the comments. So when they do, it's more of an argument. But whenever it's something that white America does and Black people comment on it like, hey, look at this, white people always say, well, why do we always have to make it about race? And when you look at the roots of America, as we talked about before on this podcast, is you can't escape race when it comes to this society, because America was built off of race, off of racism, to keep people controlled. And I'll just go down a little history of it. Racism was created based off of lies and intentional misinformation to be able to control people. Let's just look at it that way. So for one, it was number one, it was used to support slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And then from there, it was used to support things like Jim Crow, things like redlining. As we continue on to the day, it was also used to basically change history and dictate the future. When you look at certain things, for example, I'll get into this a little bit later when you talk about stereotypes and how stereotypes that was created back then still are in the frame of mind of people today that has an effect on society. It was also used to divide and conquer. You asked this question a lot on this podcast. Why do they hate Black people so much? And I don't think it's just a form of hate. I think it's more about self-interest. When you look at where racism really is and the origins of it, I think it's more about the self-interest. I think it's more about, at first, using this as a way for us to be able to build wealth off of somebody else. And then today it's used to protect that wealth away from somebody else. In the 1400s, Portuguese writer Gomes de Zerara literally invented black and white. Before the 1400s, there was really no mention of anywhere about color, of black and white. You were either from this area or from this family or those type of things. It was never based off of race. But him and Henry the Navigator, who were pioneers in the transatlantic slave trade, began to use race as a card of hierarchy. Of course, putting the African or the Black person below the European or the white person. And he grouped all of these people in so we don't have to deal with the hierarchy being in the form of money or in the form of family. The hierarchy now is a form to the naked eye. I can look at you and see that you're Black. I can look at you and see that you're white. Here's the hierarchy of that. In this instance, they was able to create the stereotypes that I'll talk about a little bit more later, that Blacks are beasts, are uncultured, and need to be saved. These were the excuses that they used to portray what they wanted to portray as far as black and white. In America, you had Bacon's Rebellion from Nathaniel Bacon, who was a wealthy landowner in Virginia. And pretty much him, some white indentured servants, some black indentured servants, and some black slaves all band together with their own militia and began to fight against the elite in Virginia to the point where they burned down Jamestown. After the fact, this is where everything changed, because they never wanted this to happen again. We can't have blacks and whites banding together for the sake of the colony. So after the fact is when they decided we have to find a way to separate. After that, indentured servants began to smooth out. And you were either a poor white person with land, or you were, for black people, you were a slave. There was no in between. This created the system that blacks are at the bottom of the totem pole. They shouldn't even be congregated with. And they began to pass these laws to separate the African from the European, or the African and Native American from the European. And the process became where if you were a slave, you were now a slave for life. And then white people, again, the indentured service began to get land, tools, and resources available to them. And there was also laws passed, such as the way that interracial marriage was against the law. Blacks cannot bear arms. It was unlawful for blacks to go outside to travel without written permission. Maryland created a law that baptism did not set the black person free. And in New York, if you were to walk outside as a black person, you had to have a lit lantern to go outside. This was the first time in human history that the terms black and white are put into law right here in America, to separate, to divide, to control the narrative. And this is the way that you justify it. Here's the part I want to get to, and it's something that we haven't discussed on this podcast. You always talk about the lengths that they go to be able to support these ideas. What they used was science. The science that they used was to say that the African or the black person was naturally inferior to white people and was the best case scenario for slavery. And here's the beautiful science that they came up with. The skull size of the European is bigger than the skull size of the African. So their theory was the brain size of the European was bigger than the brain size of the African. Therefore, they were more intelligent than us. The physician Samuel Cartwright said that with these smaller brains and physical intellectual inferiority, that liken blacks to animals, monkeys, apes, especially. Blacks also was described as being childlike because of the smaller skull. So they had to have, this is why you call black men boys, and this is why you call black women girls back then. Even to today, people still do that. But he said that they needed government in everything, or they would run amok. So slavery was for their own good. Let me just get into a few. Carl Linnaeus said that the African was black, relaxed, fizzled hair, silky skin, flat nose, tumid lips, sly, lazy, negligent, anoints himself with grease, and needs to be governed. The European was white, long hair, blue eyes, gentle, acute, inventive, covered with close, and needs to govern other people. These are sciences that they actually say that are prolific in what they do. Charles White said an English physician surgeon believed that races occupy different stations in the great chain of being. And he tried to scientifically prove that human races had a distinct origin by saying that whites and Negroes were two different species altogether. Benjamin Rush was a founding father of the United States, and he said that black was a hereditary skin disease that could be cured. Christoph Meiners said that if you split mankind into two divisions, the white race is beautiful and the black race is ugly. These are scientists that they educate people with, to where they say you need to go do your research and find credible sources of what they said. These are some of these people. He also said that when he looked at the anatomy of the Negro, that we are more carnivores. Observation that we have bigger teeth and jaws than any other race. Thomas Jefferson said that the blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowments both of body and mind. Now, Thomas Edison, back in 1896, created a silent film to where he had black people eating watermelon. And after that became the stereotype that black people love watermelon. They began to put it on postcards. They began to do minstrel shows with it. They began. In Captain America in 1941, they had an African-American sidekick known as Whitewash, who would have dreams about eating watermelon. Here's the problem. African Americans eat less watermelon than most other races.
That's right.
So through this propaganda of race, they're able to create narratives about black people, stereotypes about black people. It's bigger, and this allows them to create laws. This allows them to create a culture that's strictly about race. So when people comment on why does everything have to be about race, is because from the 1400s, right here in America, they embedded it into the mind, into the laws, into the land, that blacks are inferior. Here's why. And these concepts have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And to think that in 2024, that people think that you can just stop talking about things that happen and not include race in it when it's based on our everyday being, I think it's ignorant. So I just want to go through that. And then here in a few, after y'all go, I'll go over some stereotypes and how it affects black people here in America. But what are y'all thoughts just on that overall concept?
I'm be honest. I know Dr. Umar gets a lot of flack for, the school, a lot of things that he say, but a lot of times the flack from Dr. Umar comes from within the black race, that they might not agree with one thing that he said. My thing is, so you have, like you said, they have these scientists to go out and or say these things about black people that aren't true. Then you have people like Dr. Umar that tells us about us and what they're trying to do to us, but we don't believe that. But we believe everything that, they say, like on Undercover Brother, what was the way that they got to the black people? Mm-hmm. They putting it in the chicken.
Where?
Right? Stereotype. Now, but we'll love that, but we won't love what Dr. Umar is saying back to us, far as what the white race is trying to do to us. Mm-hmm. But like I said, even with Dr. Sebi, he gave us these things to help us, naturally, herbs and all of these things, and you still have black people that don't believe those things.
Yeah, and when you look at, because white people have spoken on Dr. Sebi, they've spoken on Dr. Umar, they've spoken on other authors or scientists that may have been black, or historians that are black, and they would say they're not real philosophers. Mm-hmm. They're not historians. They're not scientists. Right. They want, if it don't come from the white person, mm-hmm. then necessarily the source isn't true.
The funny thing is most of the scientists that were involved in putting together this information were white. Mm-hmm. So, and yet you say you don't believe it. You definitely don't believe it when it comes from a black scientist. Mm-hmm. But what do you feel about that white scientist or those white scientists? Right. You won't hear a whole lot of comment. But, the whole concept in people presenting information, especially to the black community and black people not accepting it, I call it the budget. And what the budget is why most families don't do a budget? How much money you make versus how much money you spend? Because once you put it on paper and you say that I spend more than I make, you become an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't allow you to do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So when people point out things that are negatively impacting the Black community, or that's falsehoods or whatever, we don't accept it if it doesn't allow us to do what we want to do.
And we are back. All right, sorry. Audio cut off on me. Good thing we called it in time. But Pops, go back to what you were saying.
Yeah, I was saying it's interesting that was your topic of discussion, because mine is closely related to what you're talking about. And I just want to go back a little bit. We've discussed before Candace Owens. And I think at some point we've all agreed that she's not only very intelligent, but also we agree on some of the things that she says.
Yeah, but we ain't forgot about the bullshit she said either.
We haven't? No, sir, we have not. But the thing that she talked about recently on, I don't know if it was Joe Budden podcast or the Breakfast Club, that a lot of people have been talking about, and since it's coming close to election, I thought we should talk about it a little bit. And she talked about kind of the same thing that Donald Trump mentioned before, that all Black people should be voting Republican because Democrats are not for Black people. And I know initially when a lot of people hear that, I actually had a couple people reach out to me and say, is that true? Not necessarily, but she's not 100% incorrect. We're talking about the party at this point, not necessarily the political views of the party, or more importantly, the policies of the party. So for those that went through high school, probably remember that most of the political parties that were supporting Black people during most of the era leading up to civil rights was a Republican Party. And it wasn't until I think it was 1852 that they proposed the Kansas Compromise. That's when they wanted to expand into the West.
Right.
And this was after the Missouri Compromise. And they wanted to go further west than Missouri. And some people did not want slavery to expand to the West. The Republican Party at the time did not, the Whig Party did not agree with that. They kind of wanted to say, you know what, we don't want slavery to expand. But at the time, the Democratic Party said it has to. So after the 1852 election in 1854, they created the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, to go against the Democrats because the Whig Party was failing. And they created the Republican Party that was against slavery expanding. And a lot of people believe because of that they were for Black people. They were not. Understand something. They simply did not want slavery to expand to the West. They weren't trying to abolish it, because you got to remember, this is before the Civil War. So they weren't trying to abolish it in the existing slave states. They just didn't want it to expand to the West. Not because they opposed slavery, but because they wanted the value of the property to increase. And they wanted white labor.
Two different time periods too.
Right.
So the Republican Party then is not the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a complete flip.
And we'll talk about that too. Because that's something else that she said, is that she doesn't believe that switch happened.
But the switch did. It happened with FDR. It didn't happen before the Civil Rights.
Absolutely. So the thing is that they wanted to increase the value of the land out west, and they wanted white labor, meaning more jobs for white Americans to move west. They didn't want Black settlers settling in the West. So it wasn't that they were against slavery or even pro-Black. It was all about money. So the other thing is, and just to touch slightly on what Bake just talked about. So when did it switch? There's going to be a debate that it never switched, that the Republican Party is still for Black people. And then you're going to have people like us that can bring up the policies of Republicans, the narrative of Republicans to dispute that. But after JFK was killed, Lyndon Johnson was forced to sign the Civil Rights bill. Not because he agreed with it, but because the country was on fire. And then the same thing with Abraham Lincoln. In order for Abraham Lincoln to save the country, there had to be a war. It's not because he disagreed with slavery. It's because the country was on fire. So people have to understand the reasons behind some of the things that happen. Now, just one more thing I want to touch on that she talked about that's very important when you talk about political affiliations. When she says that the Republican Party is for blacks and that the Democrats are against, here's why she says that. Is that the Democratic Party historically creates what's called social programs, government assistance, if you will, that a lot of black people take advantage of. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Democrats in supporting black people, she thinks that what happens is that black people become dependent on that government assistance, and that it holds them back from being better than the government system. And she thinks that the system was designed to do that. Now, I can't say whether it was designed for that or not. I don't know. But I can say this. She's correct in the results. The results do, in most cases, make us more apt to depend on the government for certain things. Right. Now, there's a lot of people out there that need those assistance programs. Absolutely. But there's a lot of people out there that take advantage of them, and they won't do any more than what the government assistance allows them to do. I remember I had a friend that came to me one time and said he had a friend that was trying to was living in government assistance housing, and it was getting government assistance, and she had a job, and that the social worker came to her and said, if you went to your employer and told them you only wanted to work X amount of hours a week, then we could keep you in this apartment and you could keep getting your government assistance. And that person did that. This is a prime example of what she's talking about. That person said, I'd rather depend on the system than do better for myself, even though I have an opportunity because I have a job. So rather than work more hours, she chose to work less hours. I'm not saying, of course, I don't agree with everything she's saying, but I do agree that these assistant programs does hurt us in certain facets. I'll go one step further. And a lot of people don't know this. I know this firsthand, living in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s, is that when these programs became readily available to Black Americans or just low-income Americans, that it could not be a man present in the house, an adult male. You know, they used to go door to door and knock on the door of people who was getting government assistance. And people say, well, how do they know? You lived in certain housing projects. If you lived in those housing projects, you had to be on assistance. If there was an adult male living in that house, your government assistance was taken from you. So what did you have to do? Keep them out. So what happened to the Black families when there's no Black fathers? We already see remnants of that today. So I just want people to understand that sometimes when people say things that you disagree with, it's not because they just despise the government or they despise Black people or they despise the system. They have a legitimate reason in believing that what they believe. Doesn't mean that you have to agree with them, but it doesn't mean that they're complete idiots. And in some of these cases, and I just want to go, since we're here, I just want to go to a couple more things real quick, because this is something that's been bothering me for years. A lot of that happened to us during slavery has impacted us today in terms of our mentality, what we believe and what we consider principles, core principles as human beings, and then as fathers and mothers and just people in the Black community. Is in slavery, if somebody was being taught to read, the Black people had to be quiet. You can't tell anybody. If you had a group of slaves that were congregating that shouldn't, you were told to be quiet. Don't tell anybody. And it came from both sides. So if you had a slave master who was raping a Black woman, you were told, be quiet. Don't tell anybody. If they were raping a female child, you were told, be quiet. Don't tell anybody.
Yeah, they would have conversations around slaves and to pretty much assumed
absolutely.
that they wouldn't go back and say
absolutely. Slaves, when they were going, they're going to travel unlawfully to another plantation to visit a family member or a loved one or a girlfriend or a boyfriend. They would tell the other slaves, be quiet, don't tell anybody. Now we get to a society where in order for law enforcement to do their job, they need people to give them information.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear the narrative all the time about the black community won't help the police.
Mm-hmm.
We hear it all the time. How can you expect this to? It's not all about just being protected from the people that we may tell on.
Right.
It's about the fact we've been programmed not to tell.
Yeah.
Now you want us to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult when they're investigating a crime to get people to willingly talk to the police. The other thing is we don't trust the police. And we have a history there that we've talked about on this podcast many times before. But there's another important thing that I want. This is the thing that I've been trying to get white Americans to understand. Because it doesn't just apply to blacks, it applies to everybody. When they read you your Miranda rights, it says you have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can be used against you. There's nothing in there that says it would be used to help you. So why are you inclined to say anything at all? Because anything that you say can be used against you. Nothing to help you whatsoever. Nothing. So why would you help? Now, for the black community, and this is important, we have unsolved murders right now in this area. And the one that comes to mind off the top is Kingston Campbell.
Yes, I'm glad you just said that.
And I just want to be real for 1 second, because I know a lot of people, they listen to people, and they may be the people themselves that talk a lot of bullshit. This is, be honest, bullshit. Where people say that they live for the Lord, or I live by whatever my religious beliefs is. That's going to be third on your list. Let's just be real. And I know there's going to be a lot of people that's on here that think that they're religious and that they're trying to do everything right. And if you say that it's not number 3 on your list, I'm going to tell you why it is. Okay? First, it's self-perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's family. Then it's the law. Probably going to be third, except for criminals. It's going to be switched between law and religion.
Mm-hmm.
And then religion is going to be 4 for those people that claim that they're law-abiding. And there's going to be a lot of people that dispute this, but let me give you a couple examples real quick. So the real reason, and statistics support this, especially in Virginia, because we do have the death penalty. Statistics say that having the death penalty does not deter people from murder. So people are not afraid to kill because of God. They're afraid to kill because of the punishment. That's it. It doesn't deter them because they don't believe in God, or they don't think that that punishment is going to come now. So the law is the only thing I have to worry about. So that's why you have a small percentage of people. It doesn't deter them. But the fact that the punishment, any punishment, is probably going to be better than whatever comes after that. So the punishment that comes in the afterlife or comes because you commit murder doesn't outweigh what you gain today. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to still kill. So it doesn't matter, right? The other thing is, the reason I say this is because when you look at the video footage of the young men, black males, firing the weapon at the home where this young kid was playing video games in his bed, and they just turned and walked away casually. If I look at that video, I know my son. Mm-hmm. If I see one of you on that video, I would know instantly, yeah, that's my son. Mm-hmm. If I look at that video and it's my nephew, that's my nephew. I can tell by the way he walked. Mm-hmm. Fuck, I probably bought his clothes. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to know. But they don't say anything. You know why? We know why. I'm not going to say anything that's going to put my son or my nephew in jail. So where's religion? Mm-mm. Where's God play a part in that?
Right.
Where does the law play a part in that?
Right.
Self-perseverance, family first. Say what you want. We all live by that. There's very few people that are going to turn their kids in that situation.
Turning your kids in is one thing. My problem with this is we got a saying that we say when stuff like this happens, especially around white people, and they like, oh, this is a bad crime. And we always say the streets know.
Right.
The streets know exactly who did that.
That's right.
Right. The people are going to talk. You may look at that and say that's your family member, but everybody else in the community know too.
That's right.
Right. My problem with this is nobody has said a fucking word.
Nobody said nothing.
Now, if this was gang violence on gang violence, okay, we get it. Y'all ain't gonna say a word. This is a 6-year-old kid who deserved the right to grow up. And one of the excuses that I hear on why people are like, they don't really care about it, and I don't mean no disrespect intended, is the mom. They like, the mom is out here in the streets. You do this, you do that. I'm like, I don't give a fuck about what she doing.
I'm with you.
This is about the 6-year-old kid who people in that community know exactly what happened. They know exactly who did it. And it's been a year and nobody has protected it. It's not even about the police at this point. Because even with the Black Panthers, even with we saying that we want to defund the police, it's more of the aspect of, we'll take care of it. We'll make sure that that person turns themselves in safely and not be killed.
That's right.
But there still has to be justice for it. You can't march in the streets and justice for this, justice for that, justice for this. When something in your community happened and a 6-year-old innocent kid has no justice and nobody says a word.
Yep.
But like you said, you want to bring up religion. This is what bothers me the most. And I applaud their effort, but it solves nothing. After these incidents happen, the first thing you see is a Stop the Violence rally.
Yep.
And they meet with the police and they meet with the mayor. And the only thing that you see in the picture that they take is a bunch of people who are 50 years plus.
Yep.
Please tell me what 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid going to see y'all shaking hands and hugging and going to say, you know what, I'm going to put this gun down.
Put the gun down. Not gonna happen.
If you want to reach these people, these young kids, number one, take care of your fucking household. Number one. Number two, take care of your community for incidents like this so they can know nothing goes unpunished, even if we know each other. And number three, reach the youth where you're at. Community service is the best thing that you can do. But the fact that some of these people feel like they're just marching and protesting works, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And until you get involved in these young people's lives on a day-to-day basis, you're never going to change anything. And that's what bothers me the most.
And this is one of those situations where can't blame white America for this.
No.
Can't blame white America for this. So at some point, Black America has to have the power and the courage that got us to where we are today.
Yeah.
In order for us to continue on. Because otherwise, we're going to continue to kill each other. Remember what I said on the last podcast about what Dick Gregory said. We can talk about we're tired of black on black crime, blacks killing blacks. We can say that all day long.
Crime is crime, though.
Crime is crime. And you're going to kill where you are.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're killing each other. Why do you think white America will be?
Because they can highlight it.
Yeah.
It goes back to that structure that I talked about in the beginning, is the fact that when we can divide by race, we can highlight this. And I'll get to that. Let me get to that for a second, because this is important. When you look at the stereotypes, right? Some of the stereotypes that you hear is that let's just start small. Like black people steal, right? Statistically, that isn't true more as it is from any other race.
That's right.
We're not the biggest in embezzlement, fraud, burglaries, the larcenies, auto theft. We're not the biggest in statistics in that. We steal the same as everybody else steal. It's not a huge difference, right? Nor have we stolen entire countries and land and all that other and resources. But when these things are brought into existence for generations, this is how we get followed around stores. This is how you get pulled over in neighborhoods and they want to know why you're there.
That's right.
Right? But if we was to see a white person in a park, we wouldn't pull our kid close to us.
No.
Right.
And the reason I'm saying that is because you know who's the number one in child abuse and molesting children and kidnapping children? It's white men.
Yep.
But we don't carry that stereotype of them statistics and put it on you on an everyday basis.
That's right.
We don't say we're not sending our kids to public school because there's a white kid and he's probably going to shoot that motherfucker up.
That's right.
We don't say that,
We
right?
don't say that.
Black people are violent. Historically isn't true because y'all have whole world wars amongst yourselves, right? Black people are athletic or just athletic. And we buy into this stereotype and it diminishes our intelligence to think that we only can do with our bodies and not do with our mind. This is how they can say a black quarterback can't be successful because they think about the physical aspect and not the intellectual aspect. Why he can't be a coach, why he can't be an owner, all of these things. I had a coworker who once told me he didn't know that black people were so educated until he got to college. He was from Savannah, Georgia. And he said, growing up, he only knew a few black people and they met the stereotypes that he saw in movies.
That's right.
So he said when he got to college at LU, he was shocked at how many black people went to college. And it goes into that stereotype that we talk about because Malcolm said if we're taught that people have never did anything, then it's easy to think that they never can do anything.
That's right.
Stereotypes like black people can't afford to live here. When we see in times where black people live in neighborhoods and neighbors come out and interrogate them, hey, what are you doing over here?
That's right. Because they can't believe that they can afford to live in that neighborhood.
Even going back to the 50s and 60s, it wasn't the fact that we couldn't afford to live there. It's the fact that you didn't want us to live there.
That's right.
Right? Riots is a black thing. We talked about this on the podcast. Most of the riots that happen here in America are race riots on white people on black people. Black people on welfare. More white people on welfare. Black is synonymous with ghetto. There are poor neighborhoods all over this country, and a lot of them aren't majority black. But when you hear the word ghetto, people normally just think about black people.
That's right.
Black fathers abandon their children. And new studies have shown that black dads are more involved in activities with their children than any other racial group in this country. Black women have attitudes. They speak their minds. I had a coworker one time who told me that our supervisor didn't know how to take her. She was the only black woman on the shift. And the reason why he didn't know how to take her is because she was one of those people, if you said something to her, she will respond to what you said. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't know how to take that, but they just go back and say that, well, black women are angry. You talked about on this podcast before that white businesses are more professional than black-owned businesses. But you can't compare a startup black business to a business of a white-owned company that's been operating for decades. Mm-hmm. You can't compare the two. And when we look at these things, we look at the way stereotypes have shaped race, that in the back of everybody's mind, when certain things happen, is, oh, white people did that shit. Black people did that shit. But for the most part, when it comes to something being negative, it's always a black person is involved with those negative stereotypes that affect us on an everyday basis, that we can't escape because it's been embedded for generations that black people are violent, that black people steal, that black people can't afford this, that black people are on welfare. And when you begin to trickle those down, they've asked immigrants, why don't they like black people? And these are the responses that they give, and they've never lived here before and have no idea how we operate. But these things are constant. A teacher told me one time, and this was not long ago, I'm not going to say her name. She said that after the George Floyd situation, she lost a lot of her friends that she's been friends with for a long time. And she said because they just openly started saying racist things and expected her to agree with it, almost like this is universal about black people. And she said, you know what? I can't talk to them because my daughter, their daughter, hangs out with another black girl, and I don't even feel comfortable because this is the way that she feels about them. Mm-hmm. And that's just what we have to deal with on a normal basis.
I had a white guy ride with me a few weeks ago, and I was delivering to a farm, and of course, you know, they got a bunch of Mexicans that work there. Some speak English, some don't. Now, this was my first time. He had came up to me and he held the phone up to me. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? So I look, okay, I see it's a translator app. Okay, you don't speak English. Cool. So we have a whole dialect. I talk into the phone. He reads it. He talks into the phone. I look back at it. That's how we communicate. So we leave, and the guy was like, yeah, man, if you can't speak English, then you shouldn't be over here. If I can't understand what you're saying, then you shouldn't be over here. And I'm like, if I get on the phone right now and call my brother, cousin, you ain't gonna understand the shit that we talking about. Right. So are you saying that I shouldn't be over here? No, man, I'm not saying that. You should be here, but if they can't speak English, I'm like, fam.
How you guys feel about the backlash that Beyonce is getting for the country album?
Well, one, you knew it was coming. Two, they know, like we know, she's coming to take back what we started. But again, like Bake said in the beginning of the podcast, they want to protect what's theirs.
What they think is theirs.
Yeah, what they think is theirs.
Even though we created it, even though we bought, I think
they're so accepting of something. Shaquan, it's a song that's on radio now that I love to death. It's a country song. Mm-hmm. The guy's named Teddy Swims. Mm-hmm. Was it Lose Control? Mm-hmm. We accept that song. They play on an R&B station. We have no problem with it, right? We have crossover all the time into our genre. Look at rap. Eminem. Debate all the time to the point where people don't even refer to him as the white rapper.
Not even just the rap. When you look at some of these platforms about hip hop, they're white platforms.
They're white platforms. And we're okay with that. But as soon, and I do want to make this point though, because the next question is, how do you guys feel about the backlash that everybody's talking about regarding Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese and Cardoza?
I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of mine. And so just to tell the people out there, you're looking at three people that watch women's basketball. It's simple, bro. We talking about the number 1 pick versus the number 7 pick. Essentially, normally we're used to that Caitlin Clark being black. Right. That's what we used to. But this girl, or this woman, is gonna open up so many doors for the women that's coming behind her that it's bigger than white or black. Right? She just signed the Nike deal, $28 million.
Yeah.
You know, does Asia Wilson deserves that? Yes. Did she get it? No. But at the same time, Caitlin Clark is opening up these doors for all of these women hoopers that should have already been open, if we being honest. Just to close, we've spoken about her many times on this podcast. Do she get the just due that she deserves? No. We can sit here and run off all of her accolades. It's a super long list from high school to college to WNBA. Signed with Adidas. For me, outside of Lisa Leslie, one of the first women I seen dunk. I want to say, I could be wrong because I'm not looking at it, but I believe she won Rookie of the Year and Finals MVP or something like that in the same year. Mm-hmm. And the women before her, take nothing away from them, but Candace Parker was like the first one to really, that you can associate face with WNBA. Mm-hmm. Personality, super bigger than basketball. You love the off the court. And I mean, Asia Wilson say it all the time, paved the way for her. Because if you look at Asia Wilson before Caitlin Clark, the biggest personality outside of basketball. You love what they do on the court, you love what they do off the court, and then not to take away her ability to look at basketball, commentate basketball, give her opinion on basketball, sitting up there with three men who make jokes about the women's sports, and then her be able to back it up, and her be able to stand on her own too and talk sports with three guys that actually played in the NBA. I mean, Candace Parker, salute on your retirement. Thank you for everything that you gave to the game. Thank you for showing young girls the way. Thank you for showing young girls that they can commentate. That's why you have Taylor Rooks. You have all of these females women who are now commentating the sports. And I believe all of that kind of started with Candace Parker.
Facts. Kudos to you. You only made one mistake in your whole life, and that was going with Sheldon Williams. Whack ass. That was trash. We love y'all. Peace.